ever harm. And you will not be able to save them.
Hello, adventurer, and welcome back. Runescape has a plethora of interesting antagonists, such as Zamorak, Karapak, and even Zimorgul. But what do all of these bad guys have in common? They are simple pawns on the chessboard for the multiversal horror XAU TAK that we will be covering in today's video. Based on the wiki, XAU TAK is a mysterious entity associated with Blackstone, the undead, which is why I think it has something to do with the necromancy skill, and the oceans, as well as the phrase, "Do you really think you can save them?" which you're going to hear a lot this episode. XAU TAK is an ancient entity that could be as old as the universe and the elder gods themselves. Sometime around the Great Revision that destroyed the previous universe, Ma's egg, which is ZAROS and Necromancy's mother, had been corrupted with a scar of black stone. And we're going to be talking about black stone a lot today, which caused her to be born malformed and resulted in only 4 elder gods being active at the start of the new cycle. Although it's never outright said that this was XAU TAK's doing, it is implied since the black stone that corrupted Ma's egg is of a similar nature to the other black stones we'll be talking about today. It is implied also that XAU TAK has some association with Erebus, which oddly enough has been labeled as the afterlife for the followers of ZAROS. We know that the ambassador summons portals from Erebus, meaning that there is some connection between XAU TAK and the mysterious plane of existence. This, along with several other factors, leads me to believe that XAU TAK intentionally corrupted Ma's egg to create ZAROS and Necromancy. In other words, he is essentially the father of the 2 incredibly powerful gods, ZAROS and Necromancy. All of the followers of XAU TAK tend to be able to use both necromancy and ancient magics, creating another connection between ZAROS and XAU TAK. Also, both ZAROS and Necromancy have a divine influence ability. The longer an individual is around them, the more influential they become to them, succumbing to any desire that ZAROS and Necromancy have. This is very similar to the way that XAU TAK can take control of people's minds simply by having his name heard or just being in the vicinity of a black stone. This leads me to believe this is an inherited trait from their father, XAU TAK. It is also worth noting that the soul split ability that you get from Azanadra, one of the generals of ZAROS, is the polar opposite of the split soul ability from the Eldritch crossbow that is dropped from the ambassador, connecting XAU TAK and ZAROS once again. In the upcoming Necromancy release, it is interesting to note that there will be a split soul necromancy ability connecting necromancy with XAU TAK as well. This leads me to believe that the necrotic energy that was mentioned in RuneScape's news post is energy from the Schism, which I covered in my last episode. It is also already well known that the most powerful necromancers that are already on RuneScape, such as Oreb the Magister, Taraket the Necromancer, and the Undead Ambassador himself, are on Team XAU TAK. It is incredibly interesting when you start looking into the Ambassador and Taraket to how the Dragonkin came to be on XAU TAK's side to begin with. In the previous universe, before the Elder Gods destroyed it, the Dragonkin escaped by creating a rip in space-time and escaping into the abyss. It is my belief that while they were in there, some of them made contact with XAU TAK. For example, the ambassador tells of a story that his grandmother would tell him when he was little of this black pebble. It is my belief that the black pebble is the black stone that is mentioned so frequently in XAU TAK lore. It is interesting to note, though, that there is a couple of disambiguations between a few of the realms. I just mentioned the Abyss, which was described as such, but there's also Erebus, which is the Zarosian afterlife, which could potentially be the same realm, also known as the Shadow Realm. We know from the most recent quest, Twilight, that there are incredibly powerful beings within this realm that are even capable of taking down an Elder God, such as when Karapak lured the Leviathan out and attacked Jazz, dragging it into Erebus. Which is interesting to note because if the Dragonkin had survived a great revision in Erebus, now you have Karapak, a shadow anima scientist, trapped in Erebus with an elder god that it has limitless energy to experiment on. So what kind of horrific things could Karapak be doing inside of Erebus? Also, he could potentially be under the watch of XAU TAK while in there. It is also worth noting that currently inside of Erebus is ZAROS and Shar, one of his generals, as well as several other notable individuals. There are also 2 artifacts inside with all of this motley crew of people, so something horrific is going to be coming out of Erebus very soon. It is worth noting that when ZAROS went to Erebus through the monolith, he was quoted as saying, "What I seek cannot be found in this universe, and so I go in search of another. I have the apparatus I require, the material to shield myself, a tool to guide me in that place, and an offering for those who rule there. My God." During Extinction, Saren also gives us a foreboding warning. Such a word means nothing to the forces of Erebus. It is a realm of entropy, not life, and it will do nothing but consume and destroy. It mindlessly seeks power, nothing more. It can feel the eggs, talking about the elder eggs. That must be why its mouth opened now, right above us all. There's something on the other side searching for them. Karapak is quoted saying, "The portal, it goes to the source of all shadow anima." And that brings us to Raksha. The connecting factor here is during the fight with Raksha, he will scream out, "I will drag you into Erebus."
I will drag you into Erebus.
Raksha can summon shadow anima onto the fight field.
Do not let him absorb the shadow!
Raksha also has a very connected past to the Dragonkin. During the First Age, Raksha was originally a normal dinosaur that lived on Runescape thousands and thousands of years ago. At some point, Raksha found the Codex, which is what ZAROS used to travel to Erebus, or the Monolith, and it imbued him with immense amounts of shadow anima, turning him into the Shadow Colossus. However, the power did not come from the Elder Gods, but from somewhere else. This power caused Raksha to grow, large and intelligent and savage, and it was now capable of communicating with others through visions, as it did with the Ambassador when it gave him his religious vision that turned him into a XAU TAK follower to begin with. A Dragonkin hunter named Varanus of the Nodon faction managed to trap Raksha. The Kendra Council later had Raksha transported to Orthan, imprisoned in a pen constructed by Nodon architects. Deeply fascinated by Raksha, the Dragonkin Karapak began to thoroughly study the imprisoned dinosaur and its abilities, and Karapak was able to remove traits from Raksha and put it into 3 other dinosaurs, which became the Rex Matriarchs. These were the earliest prototypes for dragons, considering Karapak created the dragon race. Cranon considered Raksha to be the source of his religious inspiration after it projected a hateful vision to him, meaning that Raksha has played an incredible storyline in RuneScape's history with XAU TAK. When speaking of established XAU TAK lore, one cannot fail to mention the skeletal horror from the Rag and Bone Man quest. These skeletal remains are of a long-dead Moanu. This abomination also drops a journal decaying the life of these Moanu and even the gods they worshipped on their homeworld. The only remains of the Moanu in current RuneScape are the horrors that plague Mostly Harmless and also protect the Ambassador at the Shadow Reef, a guardian or mouthpiece for XAU TAK. Here are a couple of interesting lines from the journal. "Blood is the gift, blood is the price. So demands Tezcatlipoca his price for raising up the Moanu above the lesser species. In the beginning, there was only darkness, a shadow in which only Tezcatlipoca set. As time moved forward, the stars came to light to illuminate the darkness, and they cast their dim light over the newly born world of German. On our world, intrigued by this new world, Tezcatlipoca turned his attention to the surface, his great burning eyes plunging the world into brilliant light. But the world was still empty, the jungle silent and devoid of life. This reminds me of when the ambassador says, "So you come to witness this great moment, to be present as his gaze is turned upon this world, to be one of the first blessed by his black radiance. I can understand such dreams." It goes on to say, the bored Tezcatlipoca reached his hand across the world and pricked his finger upon a mountain. His blood flowed down the surface and mixed with the stone and trees, and essentially created the Moanu, who they called strong as stone. The Moanu actually had several gods that they worshipped, but let's talk about Tezcatlipoca first. Him being a mythical deity, they of course worshipped him. Another encounter that it details is how the cave horrors and all the other horrors came to Runescape. Essentially, they were being defeated by the lesser tribes of their homeworld, and they encountered a pure black lake which whispered to them, and from this, black hands emerged and brought them to Runescape. Now, on the wiki it does note that this is possibly XAU TAK himself, however, I'll leave that up to you to decide. It could be a general or a duke, an underling to XAU TAK, as he does tend to infect people's minds and use them as conduits. But regardless, he is the puppet master. The skeletal horror is said to be the physical representation of one of these gods called Nyar la Hydra, which is typically shown being made of bone and strung together with sinew. These Moanu even have a fertility god named Uvhastur. It is sort of a mother deity to the horrors, who represents the god with a carving of black stone. The carving appears to possess vague hints of a woman's body, but without arms, and whose legs are instead a mass of tentacles. Sounds super hot. It has a large number of heads, all of which emerge from a neck made of even more faces. And the final deity mentioned in this XAU TAK pantheon in the Pestilent Journal is a lunar deity named Yog-Sathla. It is a stone carving depicted as a single eye that reminds the viewer of the corpses of decaying fish. The horrors do not worship this deity, they instead fear it and use its name as a curse. And it reminds me of something the Fremenic V said when he mentions he traveled to a world that XAU TAK had visited. He described the world as an ocean of corpses and states that it has already set foot on Runescape and taken hold. Ironically, the place where you fight the skeletal horror is directly underneath of this abyssal rip, which I've already explained why I think these are tools that XAU TAK uses. In fact, Bilrak, the Majorat under Daemonheim, spent his entire lifetime trying to find one of these rips to bring his master Zamorak through to Runescape. On the wiki, it even mentions an incident where the Calgerian demons attempted to use a Majorat ritual marker to summon XAU TAK to the bottom of Daemonheim. Having all of these things right next to each other, as well as Fort Ferentry, which is meant to be one of the hubs of necromancy, is no coincidence at all. We've talked about the ambassador plenty this episode already. However, I haven't exposed to you one of the most juicy pieces of evidence that I have that XAU TAK is returning. The Elite Dungeons 1 through 3, and even 4, which I could go into for a long time, are connected to XAU TAK. In the first Elite Dungeons, Siryu is actually trapped inside of black stone shackles. In the second Elite Dungeon, you have the Blackstone Dragon, who was created by Carapac, a shadow anima scientist. And in the Elite Dungeon 3, you have the mouthpiece for XAU TAK himself, the Ambassador. Well, I've been reaching out to some of the J-mods on Twitter for advice or tips, and Mod Orion was kind enough to help me out and suggesting that I look at the Temple of Amnesia at the Azure Room. I ended up reading up on what was inside of this room, and I found a very interesting passage. It reads as follows. The spiral of time leads only to the gaping maw of eternity. The well is guarded from interlopers. It will be the doorway. The 7 heads of the Hydra are at the ambassador's beck and call. The spiral of time leads only to the gaping maw of eternity. The thing that made this so profound for me wasn't even the fact that a JMod had told me this. It was the fact that Mod Orion is actually the ambassador himself, having voiced him for all of the transcript. The first passage, the spiral of time leads only to the gaping maw of eternity, is most likely a reference to Jas, the elder god, who is a spiral of time, being dragged into Erebus by the Shadow Leviathan. The second part is the juicy part though. The well is guarded from interlopers. It will be the doorway. As I'm sure all of you know, the upcoming Necromancy skill has a well involved in it, the Well of Souls, which is what Rasael seeks to reclaim and destroy. Now, we know that followers of XAU TAK are known for necromancy, so I think this is a clear-cut connection between the first necromancer and the shadow god XAU TAK. Also, in many of the arts depicting the upcoming necromancy skill, there are schisms or abyssal tears in the actual scenes. Another thing is that Jagex actually released some of the necromancy abilities, and one of them is called Split Soul. Well, Split Soul is also an Eldritch crossbow ability, and that's what connects XAU TAK to this skill as well, since the Eldritch crossbow is dropped by the ambassador. The next line, the 7 heads of the Hydra are at the ambassador's beck and call. On the wiki it says this is a reference to the pirate group that helped with the Elite Dungeon 1 fiasco, but I think this is incorrect. The 7 heads of the Hydra, in my opinion, are the 7 Magisters of Terragard, which we chatted about in the last episode. It says that they are at the ambassador's beck and call, and since we know they use the schism for power, this could be a reference to that. Or perhaps this is a reference to the slain Lornab, the Hydra of Misthalin that ZAROS slayed and used its power to open a portal to Infernus. The final line of this is, "The spiral of time leads only to the gaping maw of eternity," repeating the first line. What do you think about the Azure Room and the mysterious lectern? I definitely think that it's an interesting piece of evidence, and it really blew my mind to read this. If we look at virtually every quest and storyline on RuneScape that involves some sort of necromancy, we get a hint of XAU TAK's presence. Even in stuff like the Zogre Flesh Eater quest, the wizard that is causing the Zogres to be reborn inserts a black prism at the Ogre burial site, causing Zogres to appear. It's also worth noting during the 2018 Halloween event, the player has to help the 4 horsemen to fight off Black Hands and Lucian that has been revived from the dead through some sort of necromancy. Before the release, a black shard would appear in players' inventories. Upon examining it, it would say, "Do you really think you can save Moya?" Clearly pointing to XAU TAK. During the event, you actually fight off a few species from Daemonheim, as well as being teleported to a warped floor on Daemonheim, connecting this event to XAU TAK once again. This is obviously important because the upcoming full necromancy requirements require the Nadir saga, which is about Moya and Bilrak finding the ritual marker on the bottom floor of Daemonheim, and Kaldurian demons attempting to summon XAU TAK directly to RuneScape. During the creation of this video, while scouring over every tidbit I could find on both necromancy and XAU TAK, I found an interesting connection between the upcoming necromancy skill and the world of Erebus, which I explained why it could be connected to XAU TAK. In necromancy, you will use runes, but not the regular class of runes created with anima on RuneScape. It will be created with what I assume to be shadow anima, but in the previews, I noticed that the background looked very familiar. If you look, this background to these clips are identical to Erebus that you get to go into after the Battle of the Monolith. This is definitely something I don't think they intended to put out, but if you look at it, it seems pretty convincing to me. During my research, I discovered that these rune crafting altars for the necrotic runes are actually not called altars, they're called idols. And typically, an idol is dedicated to a god, and this made me think of ZAROS' quote about an offering for those who rule Erebus. Earlier we talked about the 4 Moanu gods and how they are related to XAU TAK and Erebus. Potentially these 4 gods could be related to each of these idols representing one of the elements involved. I originally intended this video to be only around 10 minutes long, but I had so much fun doing research and found so many interesting things, I had to share them with you today. Let me know what you think down below in the comments section. If ZAROS has no relation to XAU TAK, then why does Raksha, the first one who spoke of XAU TAK to the ambassador, threaten to drag you into Erebus, the Zarosian afterlife? Why does Sliske the Necromancer, former Zarosian, imbue us with shadow anima to go into Erebus? Why does it say in the Azure room, the well will be the entrance? And in the new update, Rasael says things to the player and says he wants to investigate the Codex. Why does Rasael want to control the well? Do you think ZAROS could be the son of XAU TAK and Ma? And what is Karapak doing to Jas in Erebus with unlimited shadow anima? So while literally making the thumbnail for this video, I noticed probably one of my most conclusive pieces of evidence that ZAROS is indeed XAU TAK's son. If you look here, this is the ZAROS damaged armor before he is repaired. If you look at his armor, the pieces that are coming over the top of his shoulders are literally hands. The same hands that can be identified at the Blackstone Dragon and the Ambassador, connecting ZAROS to XAU TAK once again. Don't forget to like this video, leave me a comment, and let me know what you think. Without further ado, Pride Slayer out.